This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Welcome back to the second part of my discussion with ChangeMaker Stephen Norman, the Executive Director of the King County Housing Authority that serves the Seattle suburban metropolitan region. Stephen, King County was one of the original moving to work agencies, and for listeners of this podcast, that's a unique distinction. Are some of the programs you described in part one a result of that designation, or have you seen other impacts from having this special classification?
Well, I think virtually everything we do is the result of our being able to use our moving to work flexibility. It really enables you to reshape the one-size-fits-all national HUD programs to fit individual circumstances, support partnerships on the ground level, reflect particular community priorities, and also the realities of the different housing markets. The housing markets that I need to design housing programs in here is fundamentally different than the housing market in, say, Detroit. So Detroit they don't, unfortunately, they're not moving to work, have the flexibility to shape the programs to reflect their market, their environment, the way we've been able to do here. And I think that is the beauty of moving to work. It really creates that level of community control and community flexibility that makes all the difference.
You know, speaking of community flexibility, you guys have developed a regional mobility program, I believe, in conjunction with the Seattle Housing Authority. And you really did it before regional mobility was seen across the nation. And Quidel, we helped early on with the design of that. Can you tell us how that program has evolved or what that has done for your area?
Well, a lot of this came out of Raj Chetty's work around the impact of neighborhood quality on life outcomes for poor children. And we had all sort of known this intuitively, and there have been efforts, some coming from court cases like Gautreaux in Chicago, and even HUD initiatives such as the Moving to Opportunity program back from 20, 30 years ago. But none of them had sort of conclusively shown the impact of these placing children from poor families into high opportunity neighborhoods. Raj came along and was able to demonstrate that in ways that were really quite compelling. So it sort of put, I think, everybody a little bit on overdrive. But Raj's work has actually been misinterpreted a lot. What Raj was saying really is that neighborhood quality matters. And there are two sides to that. One is the mobility side of getting poor households with children into high opportunity neighborhoods. But the reality is, at the end of the day, no matter how successful we are with doing that, the majority of poor children are going to still be in neighborhoods where the majority of the other children are poor. So you have to bring opportunity to poor neighborhoods as well as you have to bring poor people to opportunity neighborhoods. So you have to do that. So on the first really broadening out, we had actually mapped probably a decade before we started working with Raj Chetty, the opportunity areas of the county. And we've used a whole array of tools to help us move or at least broaden the choice for families in our programs in terms of where they wanted to live. And one of the ways we did that, and this again is a moving to work innovation, is that rather than having one size fits all subsidy level in our housing choice voucher program, we essentially went market by market on a zip code basis and put each submarket into one of 6 tiers. And if you were renting a 2-bedroom in Redmond on the east side where Microsoft is, a high rent area, you would be getting free for sometimes $500 more in terms of allowable subsidy for that unit as you would for a comparable unit that was down in South County in a lower income area. And so we were essentially increasing the subsidies to broaden choice so people could afford these higher rent neighborhoods. And at the same time, we weren't leading the market in the South County neighborhoods, which is what we tended to do when we were using the HUD system, which had a one size fits all subsidy level for the entire county, both the high and the low cost submarkets. So we gave people the economic tools to do this. We also focused our purchasing of existing housing that we were putting into our workforce portfolio in the opportunity neighborhoods. So these properties became willing landlords for folks with vouchers. And some 20% of the units in our workforce housing, and this is over 7,000 units of housing, 20% of them are occupied by families with vouchers. So that provided certainly a base of landlords who would accept vouchers into these opportunity neighborhoods. We also started buying smaller buildings and turning on banked public housing subsidies, what you call fair cloth units. And we've bought housing in some of the highest end neighborhoods in the region, such as Mercer Island, where the median home price is something like 1.4 million, in Redmond, in Bellevue, in Kirkland, in areas that really were losing diversity as they completely gentrified. And we would buy these buildings and turn on the public housing subsidy and integrate them into the public housing system. What we did particularly with SHA and Raj Chetty is focus in on the client approaches. And this was around educating households coming into the voucher program that in many cases geographic choice was much more profound than they realized in terms of educational outcomes for their children, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of the environmental conditions, and really giving them the information that they needed to empower them to make choices that were in the best interest of their families. And I want to be clear that the choice for every family is different. And there are lots of reasons why a Somali refugee with 2 children would choose to live in White Center, which is a poor neighborhood in South County, where there is a support network of fellow refugees from her region, where there's a halal butcher down the block, where her imam is 5 blocks away.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of a support network has actually been fairly traditional for families coming into this country. My own family came through the Lower East Side in New York, which was a fairly segregated Eastern European Jewry that stayed there for a generation. And they stayed because, among other things, there was a very strong support network for them. So we don't push people into particular neighborhoods. We try to empower them with the tools to make the choices that are in their best interests. And we found that this worked, that a significant portion of folks looked at the advantages of some of these high opportunity neighborhoods. We helped them navigate the unfamiliarity with the neighborhood. We helped them navigate the dialogue with the landlords. We really sort of brokered their entrance into the communities. And I think this set of learnings from this, and we did this with a randomized control group, so there's some fairly reliable learnings from this, are being incorporated into the new national mobility push that Congress funded and HUD is currently pushing out. So we've been very pleased to really help advance the national dialogue on how you do this. Currently, 30% of our extremely low-income households with children live in high-opportunity neighborhoods, which is very significantly above what you find when you map subsidized households nationally in terms of poverty neighborhoods and opportunity neighborhoods.
And what you've been able to do is you've been able to align the structure and the systems to help facilitate those choices and really even open up that access for individuals. And I think, that those are the pieces that aren't there, the structure, whether it's the higher rents or, the system to be able to have a cooperative landlord or information about, what areas are opportunity, and then to allow the person to be able to make the choice and to have access. And you've really aligned all of those, and to be able to have 30% live in a high opportunity area is very impressive. And I have actually not heard of another agency have as high of a percentage. So I'm not sure if I've seen a agency by agency comparison, but definitely 30% is one of the highest in the nation.
It's hard to compare apples and oranges in the sense that every housing market is different.
Mm-hmm.
So they have certain advantages in terms of the number of high opportunity areas we have and the ability to absorb there, compared to some other areas of the country where you really have within the jurisdiction of the housing authority primarily poor neighborhoods.
You mentioned that you guys were purchasing some existing housing. I'm sure that you guys have been also a developer. And, even going back as far as, way back in the day, there were Hope 6 redevelopment projects. What are the current development efforts that you guys have underway?
Well, part of this goes back to Raj Chetty's research and the other bookend of the puzzle, which is a mixed metaphor if I've ever heard one. But the notion that we have to bring opportunity into poor neighborhoods, and we are in the completion stages of two Hope 6 projects in White Center, which has traditionally been one of the poorest, if not the poorest, communities in King County. And here we've redeveloped about 130 acres of housing, and we've done it very much on a mixed income, mixed use basis with a lot of community facilities. Will be at the end about 1,300 units of housing, including about 450 units of public housing. There'll be rental housing, and we're about 85% built out now. And there will also be a home ownership component ranging from housing that's for first-time home buyers to housing that is currently going up and selling cheek and jowl with public housing for $700,000, $800,000 a unit. And unlike the East Coast and the Rust Belt, where much of the Hope 6 activity was taking down high-rise towers and
Mm-hmm.
putting in mid-rise, mid-density with an actual reduction in units, the housing in the Pacific Northwest that was developed during the war, and most of this housing, like the two complexes we're doing, were developed as part of the wartime worker housing effort. These actually housed the workers on the Boeing Flying Fortress assembly line. After the war, they were essentially transitioned over to being first housing for returning GIs and then into being public housing. And we were basically able to double the density because these were 2-unit, one single story, essentially barracks. And they had a good life. And after about 60 years, we took them down and we've put up something that is a bit denser. So we really didn't lose affordability on the site. We were able to do one-for-one replacement. We gave everybody a right of return, and we've built on the site. Initially, when we started this, there was a abandoned elementary school sitting on adjacent school district property. And for the purposes of our master plan, we in the school district pooled the land and agreed to site the school in the way that best supported the community. So we've developed a main street. It's got an elementary school on it, which is on a campus with a Head Start program. It's actually an Educare facility, which was Warren Buffett's contribution to the early learning approach. It's sort of like Head Start on steroids. They share a campus and form a pre-kindergarten through 5th grade sort of nexus for kids. We have a public health clinic. We have a Planned Parenthood clinic. We have an optometrist. We've got cafe and restaurant and exercise facilities, a big Boys and Girls Club. The kids stream from the elementary school into the Boys and Girls Club at 3, and the out-of-school time programs are coordinated closely with the teachers at the elementary school and at the middle school. So it's really a mix of incomes. It's a set of facilities that will serve everybody in the community, not just the project kids. The point here was to truly do integration, and lots of parks. Generally, we have different priced homes from public housing to single family home ownership around different sides of a park because we believe that just because you put people cheek and jowl, they're not going to be dashing next door to borrow a cup of sugar. Families integrate through the kids, and kids don't know class boundaries. So we do everything we can to help kids mix with the theory that the families will follow them. There's a lot of hubris in some of the social engineering conceits behind the Hope 6 choice neighborhoods approach. And I think it remains to be seen how successful these are. But I know that by bringing in more higher income families into the neighborhood, it gives the neighborhood the kind of political clout that it needs to make sure it's getting the resources that it needs from the jurisdiction that it's in. So housing markets are not inherently stable. They're either going up or going down. What we're trying to do here is really stabilize it in the middle, so we have both a sufficient number of affordable housing opportunities to retain the existing population while still letting this become a different community than it was when we started, which was a fairly segregated, high poverty concentration.
You realize that if solving the housing crisis is a regional or a localized effort, so you can tailor it to the market and the needs of the community, but yet there's federal program that has to happen. Where do you think HUD or national policy, where do you think it should be going to try to help out housing authorities and what they're trying to do on the local level?
Well, I think that there are a couple of key points, and many of them are already been put into play by the Biden-Harris administration. And a lot of it goes to the notion that we simply have to scale up everything, that the recapitalization of the public housing stock is absolutely critical. We have been able in King County through a variety of financing mechanisms to pretty much recapitalize at this point so that I no longer go to bed at night and wake up screaming in the middle of the night because I'm having dreams about broken boilers and leaking roofs and mold. We've really gotten beyond that. That's not true nationally, that we have to start by protecting the assets we have. That's why it's appropriate that there be 40 billion in the president's infrastructure bill. It's recognizing that the existing affordable housing truly is part of the community infrastructure. And recapitalizing the stock enables housing authorities to pivot to what's really, I think, the overarching mission, which is around social impact and around our partnerships in the education field, our partnerships in the health field. But recapitalization is first. Universal housing choice vouchers, moving it to the notion that if you qualify for a housing choice voucher because of your income, you no longer have to wait 10 years and hope that the lottery kicks your number out to actually get the housing. And in the meantime, your children are growing up in shelters or on somebody's couch. I think that that is the game changer that we need. And it is affordable. We spend 3 times as much in this country in terms of tax expenditures on the middle income home ownership front, middle income and higher income, between the property tax, the mortgage exemptions, between capital gains exemptions, a whole array of different programs that really are helping folks who don't need the help. Certainly not as much as the folks who are absolutely at the bottom of the economic ladder, increasingly folks who are elderly. So universal housing choice vouchers, deregulating public housing authorities, that's an easy one. Every housing authority in the country should be moving to work. There shouldn't be a need for a separate program that for the first 20 years was limited to 39 housing authorities,
Hmm.
an act of Congress to get HUD to actually start to slowly expand that. We need housing and service funding coordination, flexing up Medicare so that we have adequate wraparound services so that we can get the amount of permanent supportive housing in place that we need to truly replace in the community all of the beds that were taken out of the behavioral health care inpatient hospital system nationally. Let me talk for a moment about social housing or workforce housing. And this is really, I think, where we have broken some new ground. In King County, McKinsey did a study about a year ago where they found that looking at the housing situation, that the county had actually net loss of 112,000 units of housing affordable below 80% of AMI over the last decade. That's more than 10,000 units a year that the system is shrinking by. This is because housing is being demolished to put up more expensive housing, or the existing housing is simply being repositioned in the market because the demand is there. So you are losing affordability far more quickly than either the private sector through the LIHTC program or the nonprofits through a variety of programs are creating new housing. So we started actually in the 1990s buying some of the remaining naturally affordable housing, particularly in gentrifying high opportunity neighborhoods, to simply keep it from being lost to the inventory. And we target 100 unit plus Class B multifamily. Generally, they are two-story, what we call woody walk-ups. And when we buy them, we don't drop rents because we're buying them at market price. And this is a sub 4 cap market at the moment. We simply only raise rents as our operating costs go up rather than as the market around them rises. So in essence, we're decommodifying them. We're decoupling them from market pressures. And over time, they're increasingly affordable compared to the rest of the community. And we have housing that we bought in the mid to late 90s in Bellevue, where a two-bedroom will go for $400 to $500 less a month than an identical unit in an adjacent privately owned building. So this notion of social housing, of housing that's owned by either government agencies or by nonprofits, is not new. It's done widely in Europe, in social democracies. It's called social housing. It's been done there really at scale since World War II. In the case of Vienna, it's been done that way since World War I. And I think if you look at the stats for most major urban areas in Europe, a far larger percentage of the housing is not privately owned, privately on the market, susceptible to market pressures. And this is key. I think it's a recognition of the fact that the private sector market will always push rents, and that will simply leave behind a significant portion of a lower income population. So one of the things that the Treasury can do is we are increasingly struggling with the fact that the purchase price on these kind of houses is really driven by the assumption that you're going to push rents once you buy it. And then 10 years from now, if you're a REIT or an equity fund, you're going to sell it and take the profits from the repositioning in the market. And we have used a variety of techniques to essentially fill that equity gap between the cash flow that the property can put off to pay principal and interest and what it actually costs to buy it. And that sort of second tranche, we at this point are using mezzanine loans from tech companies. Microsoft and Amazon have put in between them about $225, $230 million in equity, in debt to us as 15 or 20 year, 1% interest only mezzanine loans. So at the end of the 15
wow.
20 years, we will pay off the principal, which has not been touched. But at that point, we will have paid off enough of the underlying municipal bonds that had essentially paid for about 65% of the purchase price. Enough of that will have been taken down that we can fold the remaining municipal debt and the mezzanine debt together and refinance it and kick the can down the road for another 30-year amortization period. So we've essentially worked with them because they have recognized, as they increasingly plant their flag in these neighborhoods, that they're hollowing out the neighborhoods, that they are bringing in high-priced jobs. And those jobs are driving a housing market where production is not keeping up with demand. And as a result, everyone who pulls an espresso at the local coffee shop or serves behind the counter at one of the retail establishments or cleans teeth for the local dentists, they can't afford to live on the east side, and they are being pushed further and further out, and they're commuting an hour, hour and a half a day each way. We can't put additional lanes on the highways. And sooner or later, actually, the dental technician will find a dentist up in Everett who's 15 minutes away to work there. And it impoverishes a community to essentially make it all one dimension from an income level. And they're recognizing that they need to prevent the displacement of the community that was there before the tech companies got there, and really support a local housing inventory that is far more diverse in terms of price points than where the market would naturally take it. So that's been very successful. We just closed on an agreement with Amazon that's enabled us to buy another 1,000 units. The last deal went under contract last week, and we're looking at putting together the next financing to continue to do this as the inventory steadily dwindles, because every day you're seeing the remaining older stock taken off the market, redeveloped or repositioned. Treasury can help with this. If we were able to borrow from Treasury at their cost, wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime, could be securitized. This is the kind of capital that we need to do this, and it is a lot cheaper than new construction, and it prevents displacement of existing communities.
You know, you're currently serving as the president of the board for the CLAFA, the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities. And I know some of the things that you guys work on with your advocacy and policy efforts, you know, surround what can be done to preserve and expand affordable housing. You know, is this concept here you're talking about working with Treasury, trying to get a borrowing ability? Is this one of the platforms that you and CLAFA are working on, or are there others that you guys are tackling?
Well, I think absolutely. I think the first priority for CLAFA nationally is the recapitalization of the existing stock. I mean, you look at New York City Housing Authority, 185,000 units, that's an irreplaceable resource. And it will cost far less, even at the mind-boggling costs that are being bandied about in terms of what the deferred maintenance looks like. At the end of the day, it's far, far cheaper than trying to redevelop that housing. We have to protect the assets that we have. I think the thing to recognize about housing authorities is how much the industry has evolved over the last 20 to 30 years. Housing authorities had a number of handicaps. One is that the inventory of housing that was developed early on, much of it high rises with sort of non-hierarchical public spaces around it, was not necessarily good designs, was not contextual with neighborhoods. In many cases, it was used as a tool of racial segregation in places such as Chicago. The housing authorities are overregulated. I know of no other federally regulated industry where you have this level of focus on not the housing stock, not from an asset management role, but really on the organization. We run housing that's out of the multifamily housing shop, which is primarily for private sector project-based rental assistance operators. We run projects for the United States Department of Agriculture's housing programs, also focused on privately owned properties. And the level of regulation there is so much less than what has been developed around public housing authorities, who are also very closely regulated on the state and the local level because they are government agencies. I think that the flexibility that's needed is critical. Housing authorities also used to be very insular. They were very stovepiped. And starting with Hope 6, I think one of the profound impacts of Hope 6 was not only the redevelopment of the inventory that happened there, but also it was the first set of programs within the public housing arena that really required housing authorities to start making partnerships outside, to start doing tax credit deals, to start partnering with service agencies around development and operation. And I think that trend has continued. You have a much more sophisticated generation of housing authorities now. They know how to use low-income housing tax credits. They're experienced in redevelopment. They are very, very involved. We run a conference every year called Housing Is, which looks at the intersection between housing and education and healthcare. And really, it's amazing how this is essentially welling up on the ground level across the country, understanding how housing is truly the platform that is necessary for everything else that's on our social agenda around poverty and poor kids. So I think that this is happening, and then housing authorities, as they recapitalize, are starting to get into acquiring non-subsidized housing like we are with our workforce housing initiatives. I really think that the housing authorities are positioned to be a major tool Nonprofits will also be a major tool. There's room for both of them. We need to scale up to a degree that we need all hands on deck, and housing authorities are really an essential part of that.
His name is Stephen Norman, the Executive Director of the King County Housing Authority. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you. I very much enjoyed and appreciated the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.